I woke up to the sound of wind. Not the kind of wind you hear through a cracked window on a lazy Sunday morning. This was open air, moving air. The kind that means there's nothing around you for a long distance in every direction. I didn't move right away. I kept my eyes closed for 2 full seconds and made a decision. I was not going to panic. Whatever I was about to see when I opened my eyes, I was going to look at it the way I look at a problem at work. Clearly, without emotion, one piece at a time. I opened my eyes. I was lying in the back seat of my own truck. The doors were locked from the outside. The keys were gone. Through the windshield, I could see nothing but flat, pale desert stretching out until it blurred into the horizon. No road signs. No power lines. No other vehicles. The sun was low and orange, which meant it was either very early morning or very late evening, and I couldn't tell which yet. My son was asleep in the seat next to me. He was 9 years old. He was curled up with his jacket pulled over his shoulders like a blanket, his mouth open slightly the way he always slept. He looked completely peaceful. He had no idea. On the dashboard, held down by the edge of the rearview mirror, was a folded piece of paper. I reached forward carefully, not wanting to wake him, and unfolded it. 3 words, handwritten. My brother's handwriting. You earned this. I sat with that note for probably 30 seconds. Then I folded it back up, put it in my shirt pocket, and started thinking about water. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the year that led to it. My name is Caleb. I'm 31 years old. I work in commercial HVAC. I install and service heating and cooling systems for office buildings, hospitals, schools. It's not glamorous, but it pays well, and I'm good at it. I bought my house at 27. I drive a truck that's paid off. I have a son named Owen from a relationship that ended when he was 2, and his mother and I have a clean, functional co-parenting arrangement that works because we both decided Owen mattered more than whatever we felt about each other. That's my life. It's not complicated. My brother's name is Derek. He's 4 years older than me. We were never close, in the way some brothers are. We didn't call each other just to talk, didn't text memes, didn't go to each other's games growing up and cheer loudly. But we also didn't fight. We were just 2 people who happened to share parents, who showed up at the same holidays, who nodded at each other across the table and asked polite questions about work. His wife is Renee. I want to be careful about how I describe Renee because I don't want to be unfair to her. What I'll say is this: Renee is someone who keeps score. She remembers every slight, every perceived imbalance, every time she felt she didn't get what she deserved. She doesn't express this loudly. She's very quiet about it. She smiles and makes polite conversation and brings a dish to pass at every gathering. But underneath that, there is a ledger, and she is always tallying. About 14 months before I woke up in that desert, I got a phone call from an attorney in Flagstaff, Arizona. My uncle, my father's younger brother, a man named Roy who had moved to the Southwest decades ago and lived alone on a piece of land outside of Winslow, had passed away. He was 68. Heart attack. Quick. He hadn't been sick, or at least none of us knew if he had. I hadn't seen Uncle Roy in probably 12 years. He and my father had a falling out before I was old enough to understand what it was about, and the relationship between their sides of the family had stayed cold ever since. I remembered him from a few early childhood visits as a quiet man with a gray beard who smelled like cedar and always seemed slightly amused by things. The attorney told me that Roy had left me his land, 43 acres in the high desert outside Winslow. A small house, a well, 2 outbuildings, no mortgage, clear title. I remember asking the attorney to repeat that. He did. Then I asked why. He said Roy had left a letter to accompany the deed, which I would receive by mail. When it arrived 2 weeks later, it was short. Roy said he never had children. He said he'd watched me from a distance for years, through mutual acquaintances, through things he'd heard, and he thought I was the kind of man who would do something real with land instead of just selling it. He said he hoped I'd take Owen out there someday. He said land is the only thing they can't manufacture more of. I sat in my kitchen and read that letter 3 times. I hadn't asked for this. I didn't know Roy well enough to have earned it, but he had given it to me anyway, and I felt the weight of that, not like a burden, but like a responsibility. Derek called me 4 days later. That was the first strange thing. Derek and I did not call each other randomly. We texted occasionally when something required coordination. An unprompted phone call from my brother was unusual enough that I remember looking at the screen for a moment before answering, trying to figure out what the occasion was. He said congratulations. He asked how I was feeling about everything. He said the land sounded incredible and he'd love to see it sometime. His voice was warm in a way that it usually wasn't, which made something in me pay attention, though I didn't know exactly why. Renee got on the phone briefly. She said the same kinds of things. Warm. Enthusiastic. She asked if I had plans for the property. I said I hadn't decided yet. She said that made sense. She said there was no rush. Over the next 2 months, Derek called 6 more times. This was more contact than we'd had in the previous 3 years combined. Each call was friendly. Each call eventually circled back to the land. What was I going to do with it? Had I been out there yet? Had I talked to anyone about the value? Did I know that land prices in that part of Arizona had been going up significantly? I answered the questions honestly. I hadn't been out there yet. I hadn't talked to an appraiser. I didn't have a plan. Then Derek suggested a road trip. He said it like it was casual. He and Renee and their daughter Macy were thinking about driving down to see some of the Southwest anyway. Grand Canyon, Monument Valley, maybe Sedona. Why didn't I bring Owen and meet up with them? We could drive out to the property together. It would be good for the kids to spend time together. It had been too long since we'd all been in the same place. I almost said no. I want to be honest about that. Something in me hesitated. The sudden increase in contact, the repeated questions about the property, the convenient suggestion. I noticed all of it. I'm not naive. I've been around long enough to know that people sometimes return to your life when you have something they want. But I talked myself out of the suspicion. Derek was my brother. We weren't close, but we weren't enemies. Maybe the inheritance had genuinely made him want to reconnect. Maybe Renee had pushed for it because she thought family mattered. Maybe I was being paranoid and cynical and I was about to reject a real opportunity to have a relationship with the only sibling I had. Owen asked me 3 times if we could go see the desert. He'd seen pictures of Arizona in a book at school and decided he wanted to see a saguaro cactus in real life. I said yes. We drove separately. Owen and I from our house in Colorado, Derek and Renee and Macy from their place in Kansas. We agreed to meet at a motel in Flagstaff and spend the first 2 days doing tourist things before driving out to the property on day 3. The first day was fine. We went to a lookout point with a view of the canyon. Owen and Macy ran ahead on the trail and then waited impatiently while the adults caught up. Macy was 2 years older than Owen, and she had a kind, slightly bossy energy that Owen seemed to find hilarious. They got along the way kids do when they're thrown together and decide it's more interesting to be friends than not. Derek seemed genuinely relaxed. He made jokes. He bought everyone ice cream at a roadside stand. He put his arm around my shoulder at one point when we were looking out at the view and said, quietly, that he was glad we did this. I let myself believe him. That night, after the kids were asleep, the 4 of us sat outside the motel rooms on plastic chairs and drank beer. Renee brought up the land again. She asked if I'd looked into what kind of development the zoning allowed. I said I hadn't really gone down that road. She nodded and said that mineral rights alone in that part of Arizona could be significant. I said I'd look into it eventually. Derek changed the subject and we talked about other things until it was late. The second day we drove toward the property. It was about 90 minutes east of Flagstaff, but stopped at a state park along the way and hiked a short trail. Owen found a piece of red rock that he put in his pocket and carried for the rest of the trip. Renee packed a cooler with sandwiches and drinks, which I thought was thoughtful. We sat at a picnic table in the shade and ate. I had one of the drinks from the cooler. It was some kind of lemonade iced tea mix in a sealed bottle. It tasted slightly off to me, too sweet in a way that made me think the mix wasn't quite right, but I was thirsty and I finished most of it. About 40 minutes later, while we were back in the cars and driving, I felt it, not sick exactly, heavy, like the air in the car had become thick. My eyes felt like they wanted to close without my permission. I turned up the air conditioning. I focused on the road. I told myself I was just tired from the hiking. I pulled over once to let Derek's car pass me and take the lead, telling him through the window that my navigation was acting up and it would be easier to follow. The truth was, I didn't trust my reflexes enough to be the lead car. He waved and pulled ahead. I remember driving with both hands at 10 and 2, consciously telling myself to stay awake. I remember Owen asking me something from the back seat and me answering, though I can't remember what either of us said. The next thing I remember clearly is waking up. The truck was parked. Stopped. Engine off. Keys gone. Owen beside me, still asleep. The note on the dashboard. You earned this. I looked at the time on Owen's watch, which he'd left on the center console. It was 6:14 in the morning. I looked at the sky. The sun was coming up in the east. That meant I'd been unconscious for, I tried to calculate, somewhere between 7 and 9 hours, based on when we'd been driving. I tried the doors again. Locked, as I'd already known. My truck had a manual door lock on the inside. I pressed it. The door opened. I stepped out slowly and took in where we were. A dirt road. Or what had been a dirt road at some point. It was mostly 2 faint tracks through scrub brush now. No structures visible in any direction. No phone signal. My phone was still in my pocket, but the battery was at 4%. It must have been on for hours while I slept. And there was no service anyway. I walked to the front of the truck. The keys were not in the ignition, not on the hood, not on the ground nearby. I tried to think clearly. Derek knew where this road was. He'd been the lead car. He had driven us here, or had someone else drive my truck here while I was unconscious and then left. He had keys to my truck because I'd given him a spare 2 years ago when I asked him to check on my house while I was on a job out of state, and I'd never asked for it back. I stood in the early morning desert and I was not angry yet. That came later. Right then I was just running calculations. Water. I had a partial water bottle in the back seat and a second one, still sealed, in my bag. Combined maybe 30 ounces. The morning was cool, but the desert would be in the 90s by midday. Direction. I had no signal, but I had a compass app that worked offline. The property, Uncle Roy's property, was somewhere in this area. If Derek had driven me to this road, he'd done it deliberately, which meant I wasn't randomly somewhere. I was somewhere specific, possibly on the property itself. Owen. I went back to the truck and sat on the edge of the seat next to him and put my hand on his shoulder. He woke up slowly the way kids do, blinking, confused, and then looked at me. Dad, what's happening? I said, Hey bud, we're kind of in the middle of an adventure. He looked out the window at the empty desert. Where are Derek and Renee? They had to go ahead, I said. We're going to walk for a while and find our way to a road. It's going to be fine. He looked at me for a long moment. Owen is 9, but he's not a simple kid. He reads people. He read me right then. Are you sure it's fine? He said. I'm sure, I said. Put your shoes on. We walked for 2 hours and 40 minutes. I kept us moving in the direction of what I believed was the main highway, using the sun and the compass app on my dying phone. I'd put it on airplane mode to save what battery I had. Owen didn't complain once. He asked questions. How far did I think it was? What kind of snakes lived out here? Whether the red rock he'd found yesterday was actually a fossil. I answered every question as thoroughly as I could because keeping him talking kept both of us focused. About 90 minutes in, my phone died. I told Owen we were fine. We kept walking. When we hit the highway, it was just a line of asphalt appearing through the brush. I sat Owen down on a rock, told him not to move, and walked to the road's edge. The third car that came past was an older man in a pickup who slowed when he saw us and pulled over without being flagged. He gave us water from a jug he kept in the bed of his truck. He drove us to a gas station 12 miles east. He didn't ask a lot of questions, and I was grateful for that. At the gas station, I called Owen's mother from a payphone, one of the last ones. In that part of Arizona, I later learned, and told her calmly that we were okay, but I needed her to know where we were. I could hear in her voice that she understood this was serious despite how calmly I was saying the words. Then I called the police. What I did not do, in any of the hours that followed, was call Derek. I let Derek call me. He called 4 times that day. My phone was dead, so they went to voicemail, which I listened to later. The first 2 messages were casual. Hey, lost track of you guys, hope everything's okay. Call me when you get a chance. The third was slightly more concerned. The fourth, left at 7:43 in the evening, had a different quality to it. He said he wasn't sure what had happened. He hoped we hadn't gotten lost. He hoped Owen was okay. The word hope did a lot of work in that message. When I finally called him back 2 days later, I had already spoken with a sheriff's deputy, a detective from the county, and an attorney. I had also picked up my truck, which had been found parked near a gate on the eastern edge of the property, Locked, no damage, keys left under the rear tire. I had the interior swabbed and sent to a lab. I'd given the detective a full account of the lemonade iced tea, the cooler Renee packed, the timeline of when I'd started feeling wrong. I had also, during a conversation with Uncle Roy's attorney, learned something. Roy had named me as sole beneficiary of the land, yes, but there was a secondary clause, a reversion clause. The Roy's attorney explained to me carefully that if I died without a will of my own naming a beneficiary for the property within the first 2 years of ownership, and if I had no surviving direct line descendants at the time of my death, the property would revert to Roy's next of kin. Roy had no children. His only living relatives, besides me, were my father's side of the family, including Derek. I sat with that information for a long time. Then I drove to an estate planning attorney and made a will. I listed Owen as sole beneficiary of everything. It took 45 minutes and cost me $250. I had it notarized that same afternoon. When I called Derek, I kept my voice even. I said it was good to hear from him. I said Owen and I had a long couple of days, but we were home now. I said I've been thinking a lot about the property. He said he was so relieved we were okay. He said he wasn't sure what had happened. They'd lost us on the road and he'd assumed we'd turned back, and by the time he thought to really worry, it had been too late to do much. I said I understood. I said I'd been in contact with Roy's attorney about some of the land documents and had learned some interesting things about the terms of the inheritance. There was a pause. I said I'd also had my truck and my blood tested. Another pause. Longer. I said I thought it would probably be a good idea for him to talk to an attorney of his own before we spoke again. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said my name once, in a way that was hard to read. Not quite threatening, not quite pleading. I said goodbye and ended the call. The detective's report came back 6 weeks later. The lab found traces of a sedative compound in swabs taken from the interior cup holder and the seal of the drink bottle I'd described. The same compound was consistent with what a blood test, taken the day after the incident, still within the detection window, had found in my system. Renee had purchased that compound under a different name from an online pharmacy using a credit card in her own name. The detective found this in about 11 days. Apparently she had not been careful about it, possibly because she had not expected anyone to be looking. Derek's attorney contacted my attorney 3 days after the detective's report was finalized. Derek wanted to discuss a resolution. My attorney told his attorney that there was nothing to discuss until the criminal matter was concluded. The criminal matter took 8 months. Derek pleaded guilty to 1 count of administering a harmful substance. Renee pleaded guilty to the same, along with an additional count related to the purchase and preparation. Their daughter Macy went to live with Renee's sister in Ohio, which was the part of all of this that I sat with longest. A kid who had no part in any of it, who had run ahead on trails with my son and been kind to him, whose life had been broken by her parents' choices. I sent Macy's aunt a card. I said I was sorry for what Macy was going through. I meant it. Owen asked me, about 2 months after everything, whether Derek and Renee were bad people. I thought about how to answer that for a while. Then I said that people sometimes make choices so wrong that it's hard to understand how they got there, and that the best thing we can do is not let those choices make us smaller or more afraid of the world than we were before. He thought about that. Then he said, "Can we still go see the saguaro cactus sometime?" I said yes. Absolutely yes. The property is still mine. I've been out there twice since everything happened. The house is small, 2 rooms and a porch, but it's solid and the roof is good. There's a view to the east where the land opens up and you can see for 20 miles on a clear day. I've started fixing it up slowly. Nothing dramatic. Some paint, some repairs on the porch rail, clearing brush near the outbuildings. I found a photograph inside the house, tucked behind a loose board in the closet, of Roy as a young man standing on the porch with his hand over his eyes against the sun, squinting and smiling. He looked like a man who had found a place that was his. I put the photograph on the windowsill. Owen found 3 real fossils on the property last spring. He keeps them lined up on his bookshelf at home, next to the red rock from the picnic. I didn't need to become someone harder after what happened. I didn't need to decide that family means nothing, or that trust is for fools, or that the world is a place where you'd better always be watching for the knife. Those are the conclusions that would have made Derek and Renee's choices mean something, would have let their actions reshape who I am. I didn't give them net. I just made a will, kept the land, and took my son to see a cactus. That's all.